Get out of my house right now! I'm sure you'll come crawling back once you see how hard it is without me!
You're boring, Emmanuel. All you've ever done is fix other people's cars for a living. You never gave me the life I actually wanted.
All right, I'll go. Take your time, man. No rush.
Where do you think you're going? It's not over yet.
I'll let you know when you need to know.
The man she just called boring wasn't panicking. He'd been 3 steps ahead of her for a long time. And what had been locked inside a metal box under their bed for 6 years was about to answer a question she never thought to ask. My name is Emmanuel Carter. I'm 37 years old, and for most of my life, I believed one simple thing. A man keeps his word, even when nobody's watching. That belief carried me through 9 years of marriage, 6 days a week under the hood of somebody else's car at the garage on 47th Street. Then one Tuesday night in October, standing in my own kitchen in Bronzeville, Chicago, my wife looked me dead in the eye and told me to get out. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She said it calm as ordering coffee, with another man's hand resting on her shoulder like he already owned the house. But here's the thing nobody in that kitchen knew, including her. Upstairs, under our bed, inside an old metal lockbox, there was a phone I hadn't opened in 6 years, and after 9 years of staying quiet, I was finally ready to. Before we get into this story, I want you to sit with that image for a second. A man being thrown out of his own home, standing perfectly still, while somewhere upstairs, a locked box waited on him like it had all the time in the world. Now let me take you back to how that Tuesday actually started, because it began so ordinary you'd never have guessed how it would end. I'd clocked out at 6, same as always. The garage smelled like brake fluid and burnt coffee, and Old Man Petrosky, who'd owned the place since Nixon was president, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Go home, Emmanuel. Get some rest, son." I remember the L train rattling overhead on my walk to the car, and the first real bite of fall in the wind off Lake Michigan. I stopped at the corner store on King Drive for a gallon of milk, because it was Tuesday, and Tuesday was spaghetti night, and I hadn't yet learned that some nights rearrange your whole life before dessert. I'm not a man who raises his voice. My daddy used to say, a loud man is usually the one with the least to say, and a quiet man is the one you ought to watch, because he's already 3 steps ahead. I took that to heart. For 9 years, I worked, I paid the mortgage on the house my grandmother left me, and I loved my wife the way I promised her father I would, steady, without complaint, without keeping score. Her name is Medea. She's 34, sharp as a tack, and when she walks into a room, people notice. I noticed her first at a cookout in Washington Park 9 summers ago. I built us a life. I fixed the porch steps myself. I paid off her car. When her mother, Gloria, had a stroke 6 years back, I turned down a regional manager position that would have doubled my pay, just so I could be home in case she needed me to drive her mother to the hospital at 2 in the morning. I never told anybody that. I didn't need credit. I just needed her to be all right. So when I walked through my own front door that Tuesday, milk in hand, and found my wife standing in the kitchen in a red dress I didn't recognize, with a man standing close enough behind her that his cologne reached me before his name did, I didn't shout. I set the milk down on the counter, slow and careful, the way you'd set down something you didn't want to break. "Emmanuel," Maria said, and her voice had a coolness to it I'd never heard her use on me before, not even in our worst arguments. "This is Giovanni. He's a business partner. And also, I think you should know, he's more than that now." I looked at Giovanni. tall, put together, a watch on his wrist that cost more than my truck. He didn't look at me like a man who felt guilty. He looked at me like a man who felt sorry for me, which is worse. "You're going to want to leave," Maria continued, lifting her chin the way she did when she'd already decided something. "Tonight. I've thought about this for a long time, Emmanuel, and honestly, you're boring. You fix cars for a living. You've never once given me the life I actually wanted. Get out. I'm sure you'll come crawling back once you see how hard it is out there without me." I stood there a moment. The refrigerator hummed behind me. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and went quiet. I thought about the phone in the lockbox upstairs, and for the first time since I'd hidden it there, I let myself think about what was actually recorded on it. I didn't explain myself. I didn't remind her about the hospital nights, or the job I turned down, or the porch steps, or any of it. I just nodded once and said, "All right, I'll go." Maria blinked. Some part of her expected me to argue, to beg. Instead, I walked past both of them, climbed the stairs slowly, and pulled my old duffel bag down from the closet shelf. I packed the way I do everything, methodically. 3 days of work clothes, my father's watch, a folder of documents from my nightstand drawer, one Medea had never once asked to look inside, because she assumed, like most people assumed about me, that there was nothing in it worth looking at. When I came back downstairs, Medea was sitting on the sofa, legs crossed, sipping a glass of wine like she was watching a show she already knew the ending to. Giovanni stood near the window, suddenly very interested in his phone. I stopped at the front door. I turned back one last time, and I looked at the woman I had loved for 9 years. The woman I still, in some quiet corner of myself, wished the best for. "I'll let you know when you need to know," I said. Then I opened the door, stepped out into the cool Chicago night, and closed it behind me. Soft, deliberate, final. For the first time in 9 years, I walked away without looking back. What Maria didn't know that night was that the box under our bed held more than an old phone. It held 6 years of quiet preparation. And she was about to find out exactly what a boring man is capable of building when nobody's watching. Stay with me, because what happens next changed everything for both of us. Segment 2. Rising Action. My wife told me to get out, certain I'd come crawling back. She froze when I started packing. 3 days after I walked out of that house in Bronzeville, I was sitting on a second-hand couch in a one-bedroom apartment in Hyde Park, listening to the radiator tick and thinking about how quiet a place sounds when nobody's waiting on you to explain yourself. I still went to work every morning. Old man Petrosky didn't ask questions, just handed me the keys to the lift and let me lose myself in transmissions and brake pads the way some men lose themselves in prayer. But at night, after the shop closed, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table, and I started doing something I hadn't let myself do in 9 years of marriage. I started looking. My sister Nayeli found me first, in a manner of speaking. She'd been quietly forwarding emails to a folder I checked once a week. Proof, going back 8 months, that Maria had been seeing Giovanni long before that Tuesday night in the kitchen. Attached to the last email was a short note from Nayeli. "Hold on to this. Don't move yet. I know you're waiting for the right time." I didn't answer her. I never do, not right away. I saved everything, and I kept digging. Nayeli called me that same week, worried, the way little sisters get worried when their big brother goes quiet for too long. She showed up at my apartment on a Thursday evening with a bag of takeout from a place on 53rd Street and sat across from me at the kitchen table while I ate in silence. "You're not saying much," she said. "Not much to say yet," I told her. She studied me for a long moment, the same look she used to give me when we were kids, and she knew I was hiding a scraped knee under my pant leg so our mother wouldn't fuss. "You've been planning something for years, haven't you? Long before any of this." I didn't answer that either, but I didn't need to. Nayeli knew me well enough to read the silence for what it was. What I found next, once she left, wasn't about Giovanni at all. It was a bank account, opened a little over 2 years ago, under Maria's name only. The memo line on the very first deposit read, "Exit Fund." Not rent money, not a rainy day account. A fund with a name that told you exactly what it was building toward, and exactly who it wasn't built for. I sat with that a long time. Somewhere in the building, a pipe knocked twice against the wall, the way old Hyde Park buildings do at night, like the house itself was clearing its throat. Here's what I want you to understand about the years before that account existed. 6 years ago, Maria's mother, Gloria, had a stroke. I remember the hospital smell, the fluorescent lights, the way Maria cried into my shoulder in that waiting room on 57th Street and begged me to be there for her family. So I turned down a regional manager position, one that would have doubled what I made at the garage, because Maria needed me home, needed me steady, needed me close in case her mother took a turn in the night. I never once brought that job up to her again, not once in 6 years. I figured a man doesn't hold his sacrifices over somebody's head like a debt collector. You give, and you trust that what you gave mattered. But going through those old files, I found something my sister had also flagged for me. A string of text messages Maria had sent to a friend during that same stretch. The same weeks I was turning down that promotion to stay near her mother's bedside. I'll paraphrase it plain. She told her friend she was tired of watching me waste my life at that little garage, that I didn't have any ambition, that she was bored out of her mind. I read that message maybe 4 times. Not because I didn't believe it, because some part of me had spent 6 years telling myself a story about why I mattered to her. And that message was the quiet sound of that story finishing itself. A customer from the shop, a woman named Carol, who'd been bringing her Buick to me for repairs since before I was even married, reached out to me that same week with something else entirely. She said she felt she owed it to me after all these years of me giving her a fair price and never once talking down to her about what she didn't understand about cars. 4 years back, she told me, she'd overheard Maria at a hair salon on 53rd Street, laughing with the stylist about how she'd talked me down on a repair estimate for a neighbor's car by telling the neighbor I didn't really know what I was doing, but he works cheap, so use him anyway. Carol had a voicemail Maria left the stylist that same week, forwarded years ago as a joke between friends that somehow made its way back around to Carol and now to me. I listened to it once, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was worse than that. It was casual. My wife's voice, light and amused, talking about me the way you'd talk about a used appliance that still ran fine, if a little slow. That's the part nobody tells you about betrayal. It's rarely one big moment. It's usually 100 small ones hidden in plain sight that you weren't ready to see until you finally were. I thought about all the Sunday dinners at Gloria's house, all the times I'd driven 45 minutes out of my way after a double shift just to bring Medea soup when she had a cold, all the birthdays where I remembered exactly what she liked and never once needed reminding. None of that had been invisible to me. I just hadn't realized, until that voicemail, how invisible it had been to her. I want to be honest with you. I didn't cry that night. I've never been much of a crier. I just sat there, very still, the way I'd been sitting still my whole life. And I understood something clearly for the first time. Maria hadn't just stopped loving me recently. She'd been quietly unimpressed with me for years, long before Giovanni ever walked into a room with his expensive watch and his rehearsed sympathy. And yet, and I need you to hear this part too, I felt something else underneath the hurt, something steadier. Because while Maria had spent those years complaining about a man who worked cheap and had no ambition, that same man had quietly been doing something she never once thought to ask about. I'm not ready to tell you what that was. Not yet. But I'll tell you this much. Months before any of this happened, I'd already been invited to a community gala in Hyde Park. The kind of event where the South Side honors people who've spent years giving quietly, without needing their name in lights. Maria had been invited too, for her new business. She planned on bringing Giovanni as her date. She had no idea what that night was actually going to be about. 2 nights before the gala, I got a text message from Gloria, my mother-in-law, the same woman I'd once given up a promotion to be near. It said, "Emmanuel, I've known for a while now. I stayed quiet because I wanted to see what my son-in-law would do with it, in his own time. I think I'm about to find out." I read that message 4 times, sitting alone in my kitchen in Hyde Park. And I didn't answer her either. Some things you let unfold on their own schedule. I had one. A man sacrifices 5 years of ambition for a wife who mocks him behind his back the whole time. Guilty of destroying that marriage the moment she started talking, or guilty only the night she brought another man into the kitchen? Comment, guilty then or guilty now. Pick one, no explanations needed. I'm reading every single one before we go to that gala. Segment 3. Climax. Twist 1. My wife told me to get out, certain I'd come crawling back. She froze when I started packing. 2 weeks after that voicemail, I put on the only black suit I own, the one I'd bought for Gloria's church anniversary 3 years back and had barely worn since, and drove to the Hyde Park Gala alone. The event was held in one of those old renovated banquet halls near 53rd Street, the kind with high ceilings, brass fixtures, and a chandelier that had probably watched over 100 community dinners since the neighborhood first started organizing itself into something proud. Round tables draped in white linen filled the room, each one set with a small card bearing a name I mostly didn't recognize. Somewhere near the back, a jazz trio played low, unhurried standards, while servers moved between tables with trays of shrimp cocktail and sparkling cider. It was billed as a night honoring quiet contributors to the South Side, people who'd given money, time, or mentorship without ever asking for recognition. I hadn't told anyone why I was going. I just went, and I sat where nobody would think to look for me. Maria was there before me, of course. She'd been invited for her new business, some consulting venture she'd started, with Giovanni's money and Giovanni's name attached to half the paperwork. She wore a deep green dress, and Giovanni stood close beside her in a tailored charcoal suit, his hand resting at the small of her back, the same easy way it had rested on her shoulder in our kitchen 2 weeks earlier. I saw her spot me from across the room. I watched her lean toward Giovanni and whisper something, her mouth barely moving, her eyes never quite leaving me. I didn't need to hear it to know the shape of it. A man like me, showing up alone to a room like this, in a suit that still smelled faintly of the dry cleaner's plastic, could only mean one thing to a woman who'd already decided who I was and had stopped bothering to update the file. I took a seat near the back, away from the stage, and I didn't approach anyone. Maria stood near the front the whole night, laughing a little too loud at whatever Giovanni murmured in her ear, making sure the right people saw her hand on his arm. Then the council chairwoman stepped up to the podium. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about the spirit of Bronzeville and the South Side, about the quiet backbone of people who build a community without needing a plaque for it. And then she said something that made the whole room go still. Tonight, we want to recognize someone who has, over the last 5 years, quietly contributed more than $1.2 million to scholarship and healthcare funds across the South Side of Chicago. He never asked for a program mention. He never asked for a seat up front. That man is Emmanuel Carter." The room turned toward me. I felt every eye in that hall land on me at once, and for just a second, I let myself sit in that stillness before I stood. Near a side table, I caught sight of Nayeli, who'd come without telling me, dressed simple and quiet in navy, already smiling, like she'd known this moment was coming for longer than I had. A few tables over, Gloria sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching her daughter instead of me. Maria went rigid. I watched her champagne flute tilt in her hand, just slightly, a thin line of gold liquid nearly spilling over the rim before she caught it. Her face had gone the color of the tablecloth. In that half-second, something in Maria's mind collapsed and rebuilt itself at once. Her whole pursuit of Giovanni had been driven by a quiet, gnawing fear of ending up poor and unremarkable like her own mother once had been. And here was the boring man she'd dismissed, proving that fear had been pointed at the wrong target all along. Pride told her to keep her chin up. The tightening in her chest told her the room had already recalculated her worth without asking permission. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was the particular terror of a woman realizing she'd measured her whole life by the wrong ruler. In public, in front of the one community whose respect she'd spent years trying to buy. The chairwoman wasn't finished. "In fact," she continued, "many of you have praised the Women's Entrepreneurship Fund that supported small business owners across this community for the past 2 years. What most of you don't know is that fund was seeded by an anonymous gift from the same man. A gift many of us assumed, incorrectly, came from someone else." I didn't have to look far to see who someone else had let people assume. Giovanni's jaw tightened. Maria's hand found the back of her chair like she needed something solid to hold on to. I stood up. I walked the length of that hall in a silence so complete I could hear my own shoes against the floor. I stepped up to the podium, and I looked out at maybe 200 faces, most of whom had no idea who I really was until 90 seconds ago. "I just did what a son of Bronzeville ought to do," I said. Short, plain, no speech prepared, because I've never needed one. Then I looked directly at Maria. The whole room followed my eyes. "And I want to thank my wife," I said, "for reminding me 2 weeks ago that I was boring. Because of her, I finally decided to stop staying in the shadows." A ripple went through the crowd. Not laughter exactly, but something close to it. The kind of sound a room makes when it realizes it's watching something it'll be talking about for months. I saw a few people glance at Medea with an expression I recognized immediately, because I'd worn a version of it myself for years. Quiet reassessment. I wasn't finished. I told them, plainly, that I held a 41% ownership stake in the consulting company Medea and Giovanni were running, a stake that had existed since before either of them signed a single piece of paperwork. 2 years earlier, when Medea and Giovanni bought a struggling shell company on the cheap to launch their consulting venture quickly, neither of them had done more than a glance at the ownership records. If they had, they'd have found a minority stake, held quietly through my father's trust, that I'd invested in years before either of them ever met. Nobody had thought to ask who was really behind the trust that had held it all along, back when Maria was still telling her friends she was bored of me. I told them an independent audit of that company's books had already started the week before, and that the accounting firm handling it had a reputation for finding exactly what people hoped they wouldn't. A murmur moved through the tables. I saw a man near the front lean over to whisper something to his wife, and I saw 2 women exchange a look that told me they'd already started rearranging what they thought they knew about the successful young consultant who'd been so visible on the neighborhood social circuit lately. Money, once it's the subject of an audit, has a way of making everyone in a room reconsider who they've been applauding. I stepped down from that stage without raising my voice once. In the hallway just outside the ballroom, Giovanni caught up to me, his composure cracking at the edges, his tailored jacket suddenly looking too tight across his shoulders. "Emmanuel," he said, low enough that no one else could hear. "Look, we can figure something out here. Whatever you think happened between me and business, I don't want to be dragged into whatever this is. I've got a reputation to protect in this city." I looked at him for a long moment, the same way you'd look at a part you already know is about to fail, no matter how good it looks sitting on the shelf. "You're already in it," I told him. "It's too late for that now. Should have asked more questions before you put your name on paperwork you didn't fully understand." I walked away and left him standing there in a hallway full of people who an hour ago had thought he belonged at the center of the room. Now they mostly just looked at him the way you look at furniture that's been quietly repossessed. Behind me, I could hear Maria's heels clicking fast against the marble, trying to catch up, trying to find words for a version of tonight she never once planned for. What happens in that hallway next would be the moment Maria's mother finally stopped staying quiet, and the moment my wife found out exactly how much I'd already prepared for a night just like this one. Stay with me, because it only gets harder from here. Segment 4. Climax. Twist. My wife told me to get out, certain I'd come crawling back. She froze when I started packing. I didn't hurry down that hallway. I never hurry when it matters most. The marble floor stretched long and cold under the overhead lights, lined with framed photographs of past community honorees, men and women who'd spent decades giving quietly to the South Side. I could hear Maria behind me, her heels striking that same marble, fast and uneven. The sound of a woman trying to outrun a version of tonight she never once planned for. "Emmanuel?" Her voice cracked on my name, something I hadn't heard from her in 9 years. "You can't do this to me. Please, just stop walking. I'll lose everything. Please, just..." I stopped in the middle of that hallway and turned to face her. The confidence she'd worn like perfume all night had burned off completely. Her cheeks trembled. Her eyes had gone wide and unsteady, darting between me and the ballroom doors behind her, like she was hoping someone would appear and tell her this wasn't actually happening. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked smaller than the room around her. For half a second, something else surfaced underneath the anger. A flash of her at 25, laughing on my grandmother's porch swing, insisting she didn't need candles because the moonlight coming off the block was enough. That version of her had died somewhere between the exit fund and the voicemail at the beauty shop. And standing in that hallway, some quiet part of me finally let her go. "Talk to me," she said, her voice dropping to something almost pleading. "We can figure this out together, like we used to. Please." I looked at her for a long moment. 9 years of quiet mornings, of Sunday dinners at her mother's table, of 100 small kindnesses I'd never once kept count of, passed through my mind faster than I could have explained to her, even if I'd wanted to. "We had 9 years to figure it out together," I said. "You chose a different plan a long time before that Tuesday night." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded copy of a document I'd been carrying for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. I handed it to her without a word. "Read it," I said. Her hands shook as she unfolded the paper. It was a copy of the trust transfer I'd filed 6 years earlier, the year after my father passed, moving the house, the garage stake, and everything tied to my name into a trust bearing his. I'd sat in a lawyer's office on South Michigan Avenue the week after his funeral, still numb with grief, and made a decision that had nothing to do with Maria at all back then. It was about honoring a man who'd taught me that real wealth isn't what you show people, it's what you protect quietly for the people who come after you. She'd never once asked about that paperwork in all our years together, because she'd never once thought there was anything in my life worth reading closely. "This says the house isn't even legally yours," she said, reading it again like the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder. "It's… Emmanuel, none of this was ever really in your name?" "Not for 6 years," I said. "You were never going to get what you thought you were owed. Not because I planned to hurt you. Because I never stopped planning to protect what mattered, long before I had a reason to protect it from you specifically. Then I did something I'd promised myself I'd only do once, and only if it came to this. I took the old phone out of my inside pocket, the one from the lockbox under our bed, the one I hadn't opened in 6 years until 3 nights before the gala, and I pressed play on a short recording. Her own voice came out of that small speaker, clear as the night she'd set it. Light, amused, cruel in the easy way people are cruel when they think no one who matters is listening. "Thank God this idiot handed over the money," the recording said. "I don't have to worry about it anymore." The recording had been made the same week I sold my truck and my tool set to help cover Gloria's hospital bills. Something in Maria went completely still, then broke all at once. For years, her comfort had depended on believing my sacrifices cost her nothing to mock in private, so long as I never heard it. That quiet cruelty had been the release valve for her own fear of feeling small next to what I'd given up. Hearing her own voice mock the very act that kept her mother alive collapsed that arrangement instantly, because there was no longer any private room left to be cruel in. I watched her stop defending her choices and start grieving them, the particular grief of a person realizing the unkindness wasn't a slip of the tongue, but a habit she'd never once thought worth hiding, because she never imagined I'd be standing here to hear it played back to her face. Her face had gone the color of the marble beneath our feet. She looked at me like she didn't recognize her own voice, though we both knew she did. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Somewhere beyond the hallway doors, the jazz trio had drifted into something slower, the notes reaching us thin and delayed, like they belonged to an entirely different night, one where none of this had happened yet. Near the ballroom entrance, I caught a glimpse of Giovanni checking his phone, jaw tight, already calculating his exit from a story that no longer flattered him. That's when Gloria came around the corner from the ballroom, moving slower than she used to since the stroke, one hand trailing lightly along the wall for balance. She'd clearly heard enough of it. She stopped a few feet from us, and for a moment, nobody in that hallway said anything at all. Somewhere behind her, I could see Nayeli standing near the ballroom doors, watching, quiet, giving her mother room to say what needed saying. Gloria looked at her daughter with an expression I'd never once seen her wear. Not anger exactly, but something heavier, something closer to grief mixed with clarity. "What have you done to the man who saved me?" Gloria said, her voice trembling, but clear enough to carry down that whole hallway. "You laughed behind his back the same week he sold everything he owned to pay for my hospital bills. I sat in that recovery room for 6 weeks because of what he gave up, and you called him an idiot for it. You are not the daughter I raised, Medea. I don't know who raised the woman standing in front of me now." "Mom," Maria's voice came out cracked and thin. "Mom, you're hearing this wrong. You don't understand what it's been like." "I understand plenty," Gloria said, cutting her off, steady now. Steadier than I'd heard her since before the stroke. "I understand a man who gave up a promotion to sit by my bedside every night for 6 weeks. And I understand a daughter who complained to her friends about it behind his back the whole time. I stayed quiet because I wanted to see what my son-in-law would do with what he knew, in his own time, without my interference. Now I've seen it. And I've seen what you did, too." Maria sank down onto the marble floor, right there in that hallway, her knees folding under her, like something inside her had simply stopped holding weight. She cried the way people cry when there's no one left to perform for. Mascara running in dark lines down her cheeks, her shoulders shaking, one hand pressed flat against the cold floor to steady herself. I stood there and watched her. I didn't reach down to help her up. Some part of me, the part that had loved her honestly for 9 years, wanted to. My hand actually twitched at my side, an old habit 9 years deep, the instinct of a man who'd spent almost a decade making sure she never had to sit alone in her own hard moments. But I'd learned something in those 2 weeks of quiet preparation. Some falls, a man isn't meant to catch. Some falls are the only honest conversation a person will ever have with themselves, and stepping in front of it only delays the reckoning they actually need. I said one last thing to her, my voice calm, carrying 9 years of tiredness I hadn't let myself feel until that exact moment. "You told me I'd come crawling back," I said. "I didn't crawl. I just kept walking." I turned and left her there on the floor of that hallway, her cries echoing off the marble and the brass fixtures behind me. Giovanni, I noticed, hadn't come looking for her. He was already gone, out one of the side doors, the way certain men leave when the cost of staying suddenly outweighs whatever they came for. I didn't look back at Maria. Not because I didn't care what happened to her. I think some part of me always will. But because looking back has never once changed where a road leads. Behind me, I heard Nayeli's footsteps catch up, quiet and steady, matching my pace without a word. She slipped her arm through mine the way she used to when we were kids crossing a busy street, and we walked out of that banquet hall together into the cold Chicago night. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Some silences say more than any comfort could. What happened over the following months would strip away everything Mireya thought she still had left. Her business, her reputation across the South Side, and the last thread of hope that I might one day change my mind. Stay with me, because the fall isn't over yet, and neither is what I'd already built to replace it. Segment 5. Resolution. My wife told me to get out, certain I'd come crawling back. She froze when I started packing. 3 months passed after that gala, and Chicago moved through the last of autumn into a gray, quiet winter, the way it always does, indifferent to whatever any of us were going through underneath it. The divorce was finalized in a courtroom on California Avenue on a Tuesday morning, fittingly enough. I sat on a hard wooden bench in a room that smelled like old paper and floor wax, watching Maria across the aisle in a gray suit that looked borrowed from someone else's confidence. The radiator in the corner clicked and hissed on its own tired schedule, the same rhythm as the one in my old Hyde Park apartment, and for a moment, I let myself sit inside that sound instead of the tension filling the room. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like a man finally setting down a bag he carried so long his shoulder had forgotten what empty felt like. She didn't look at me once during the proceedings. Maria walked out with exactly what she'd brought into the marriage 9 years earlier, and nothing more. The trust I'd filed 6 years before had already moved the house, my share of the garage, and everything meaningful I owned out of reach of any settlement, cleanly and legally, long before either of us knew we'd need it settled at all. Her lawyer tried to argue otherwise, claiming the timing looked suspicious. The judge reviewed the paperwork, noted the transfer predated our separation by years, and didn't take long to disagree. The consulting company Maria and Giovanni had built together didn't survive the audit. What the accountants found wasn't complicated, just careless, inflated invoices, client funds mixed with personal spending, paperwork that assumed nobody with real standing would ever look closely. Giovanni was charged with financial fraud and is currently awaiting trial. The kind of men who build their whole identity on looking successful rarely have much left once the looking stops working in their favor. Maria lost the business. She lost her standing in a Southside community that talks, the way every close community does. And word of that hallway in Hyde Park had traveled further and faster than either of us could have controlled. Carol, who still brings her Buick in every few months, told me people at the beauty shop on 53rd Street still bring it up sometimes, though never unkindly toward me. Maria lost her mother's unquestioning support, too. The one thing I imagined she'd always assumed would survive anything. Gloria still calls me every couple of weeks, just to check in, the way a mother-in-law does when she's decided, in her own quiet way, who her real family still is. Sometimes she asks about Nayeli. Sometimes she just asks if I'm eating enough. I always tell her yes, even on the nights that isn't quite true. My father used to say, a debt you never call in is the only kind that keeps growing in value. That's part of why Gloria's calls still catch in my chest. She'd become the debt I never wanted repaid. Just family I hadn't expected to keep. There's one more piece of this I need to tell you, because it's the part that surprised even Maria's own lawyer. About 3 weeks before that gala, while Maria was still telling people I was boring, still planning to arrive on Giovanni's arm, I signed one final document with my attorney. It transferred the garage on 47th Street, along with every related asset I still held personally, fully and irrevocably, into a new nonprofit fund, the Emmanuel Community Trust, built to support young people from Bronzeville and the greater South Side who needed a hand getting into skilled trades, tools, tuition for trade school, a first set of work boots for kids who couldn't otherwise afford them. I didn't do it out of spite. I'd been planning that fund for 2 years, quietly setting aside a little more each month, long before Maria ever gave me a reason to be anything but generous about it. When Maria's attorney reached out one final time, hoping I might show some compassion and release a portion of what remained for her to rebuild on, I had my own attorney send back a single copy of that signed transfer, dated 3 weeks before the gala. There was nothing left to negotiate. Every asset that might have once looked like a lifeline had already been signed away to a cause bigger than either of us, before she'd ever had the chance to ask for mercy. I want to be honest about something here, because I think it matters. I didn't do that to be cruel. I'd made peace with walking away from everything material a long time before that Tuesday night in the kitchen. My father raised me to believe a man's worth isn't measured by what he holds on to, it's measured by what he's willing to build for people who never asked him to. I just hadn't expected that the timing of it would leave Maria with absolutely nowhere left to turn once she needed somewhere to turn. That's the part of this story I think about most, even now, not the gala, not the hallway. Just the quiet, ordinary fact that a man who gives without needing recognition eventually runs out of reasons to hold anything back for people who never once thought his giving was worth noticing. Medea sent me 2 text messages after all the dust had settled. The first one said simply, "I'm sorry." The second, a few weeks later, "I'll change. I promise." I read both of them, standing at my kitchen counter in the house I'd since moved back into. The same house, the one my grandmother left me, the one Medea had once assumed belonged to both of us equally. The one where I'd once fixed the porch steps myself on a Saturday morning 9 years ago, while she brought me lemonade and told me she'd never met a man who finished what he started. I didn't answer either message. Not out of anger. I'd worked through that already, mostly on long, quiet drives home from the shop with the radio off, the Chicago skyline catching the last of the daylight in my rearview mirror. I just understood, clearly and without bitterness, that some doors close not because you slam them, but because you finally, calmly, decide there's nothing left behind them worth reopening. Before we get to where I am now, I want you to sit with this. How many of us have given and given and given again to someone who only noticed the giving once it finally stopped? That's not a rhetorical question. That's most marriages that quietly fail, long before anyone admits it out loud. Stay with me, because what came after all of this wasn't bitterness. It was something I hadn't expected to feel again for a long, long time. Segment 6. Healing/payoff. My wife told me to get out, certain I'd come crawling back. She froze when I started packing. These days, I'm back in the house on the tree-lined block in Bronzeville where I grew up. The one my grandmother left me. The one that's only ever really been mine. The porch steps I fixed years ago still hold steady. I replaced the railing last spring just because I had a free Saturday and it felt good to build something with my hands that wasn't repairing somebody else's mistake. Betty next door still waves from her own porch most evenings, same as she has for 20 years, and asks if I'm eating enough vegetables, same as she always has. The garage on 47th Street has grown into 4 locations across the south side now, all of them still smelling like brake fluid and burnt coffee. All of them still run the way Old Man Petrosky taught me. Fair prices, honest work, no shortcuts. A good chunk of what those shops earn goes straight into the Emmanuel Community Trust, which has, so far, put 11 young people from Bronzeville and Inglewood through trade school, tools and boots included. One evening this past spring, Nayeli showed up at the house with a look on her face I recognized. The same look she'd had the night she told me she'd known I was planning something for years. "There's somebody who wants to meet you," she said. Her name is Raina. She owns a small bakery near Hyde Park, the kind of place with a bell over the door and the smell of cinnamon rolls that hits you before you're even fully inside. Her son had received one of the Trust's first scholarships 2 years back, a young man who's now apprenticing at a machine shop in Pullman. She came to the house that evening just to say thank you in person, something she said she'd been meaning to do for months, ever since her son called her from his first paycheck to say he'd never been prouder of anything. We talked until almost midnight on my back porch, the two of us and 2 cups of coffee gone cold between us, the porch swing creaking gently the same way it's creaked since my grandmother first hung it there decades ago. She asked about the garage. I asked about the bakery, and she laughed, telling me about the Sunday she forgot to set her oven timer and burned an entire batch of dinner rolls for a church order, then had to remake all of them by midnight. Neither of us mentioned Medea. Not because it was forbidden territory, but because for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was in a conversation that didn't need to circle back to anything I'd survived. Raina has a way of listening that doesn't come from politeness. It comes from actually wanting to know the answer. I hadn't realized how long it had been since somebody looked at me that way. Mireya, from what I understand through people who still talk, is doing the slow work of rebuilding somewhere outside the city. I hope, honestly, that she finds whatever peace looks like for her. I don't carry anger for her anymore. Anger is heavy, and I'd already spent 9 years carrying enough weight quietly. I decided somewhere along the way that I was done adding to the pile. Just last week, I was in the garage on 47th Street, hands still dark with grease, teaching a 16-year-old kid named Marcus how to change out a serpentine belt. He looked up at me at one point and asked, "Mister, Emmanuel, did you ever think you'd end up doing this good?" I wiped my hands on a shop rag and thought about it a moment. "I used to think success meant having a lot of money," I told him. "Now I know it's standing right here, teaching somebody else how to stand on their own, without ever having to sacrifice who you are to get there." Marcus nodded slow, like the words had landed somewhere real. I saw something shift behind his eyes, and it reminded me why I do any of this at all. This story reminds us that dignity gets rebuilt in small, specific rituals, not grand speeches. If you're grieving a marriage or a spouse this year, don't wait for a better mood to start again. Start tonight. At 6:30, once the dishes are done, sit with the chipped ceramic mug you two bought at that roadside stand outside Gatlinburg, fill it with decaf, and write one true sentence in a 5-cent composition notebook from the corner CVS about something that actually went right today. Every Sunday after church, call your own sister or your oldest friend, not to talk about what hurts, but to ask about her garden, her grandkids, her potato salad recipe for the next potluck. If grandchildren are nearby, invite the youngest one over Saturday mornings to bake in your mother's old yellow mixing bowl, the one with the hairline crack near the rim, and let them lick the spoon the way you did as a child. Keep your father's watch, or whatever object still holds someone's steadiness, in a drawer you open on purpose once a week, not to grieve, but to remember what patience actually built. Fix one small thing around the house every month, a squeaky hinge, a loose porch step, and let the fixing itself be the whole point, whether anyone thanks you for it or not. Loyalty was never about volume. It was about showing up, Tuesday after Tuesday, long after anyone was watching, trusting that truth, given enough quiet mornings and enough decaf, always finds its way back to the person who never once stopped being honest. These are authentic human stories shaped by real pain and real dreams. AI helped with grammar, flow, and structure, but the heart, the moral weight, and the life-changing lessons belong entirely to the human creators and their audience. Production team story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.